So that one's was for around North Eveleigh when Urban Growth were doing some stuff. Sorry, not Urban Growth, Sydney Metropolitan Development Authority, which was a very big REDWatch meeting. We had another one more recently down at the Redfern Community Centre around that same site. There were many candidates forums, both sort of for local, state and federal government. There were lots of meetings around public housing. Some people say there's been too much of a focus, but when you think that BEP went on for a couple of years and what's happening in Waterloo has been going on for 8 years, you can sort of understand why that's been a focus. But it's also been that working around public housing tenants probably need a bit more of that, more support than a lot of the private tenants who either own their own place or have good professional jobs and are able to do stuff. So REDWatch has made that a priority over time. One of the early things that happened in BEP1 was that there was going to be an 18-storey building on Marion Street Park. So there was 18 stories on Gibbons, and one of the things that happened was that REDWatch worked with locals, especially around the water power, to get submissions to oppose that. It's one of those things where we suspect that Frank and Robert Don might have slipped that one in so they could actually take it out again, but we'll claim that as a win nonetheless. And that the stuff in italics is officially what how they responded at the end of that when they'd removed it. Lots of stuff around Aboriginal housing and around the block with things like third vigil and just lots of things. And the Aboriginal community was very much supportive of there being Aboriginal housing going on to the block. Frank, during that time, basically went from,
You mean Fran?
Did I? I got Fran. Well, so Lynn hasn't proofread this. I was in a rush. So yes, so a lot of time and effort over that period of time, because for those people that aren't aware, originally what happened was that there was a plan for housing on the block. The first BEP1 actually halved the amount of housing you could put on the block, but so you couldn't end up in the Land Environment Court. It actually added on a whole pile of commercial that you could put in. In the end, when the housing company sort of worked around with that, the second version, the final version of BEP2, basically increased it up to 0.75 to 1, but at the same time basically said you can't consolidate the entire site. You have, which is what the housing company had done to get around it. You have to actually use the amount of residential and commercial on each site. And so then the Pemulwuy project basically became I talk about a camel being a horse created by a committee, that they were working around how they could actually get around the limitations that Frank was putting on there. So finally, when the approval came through, it really wasn't, it was the opposite to what a developer would do in terms of sitting down and working out what might work and what might not work. So that went on for a very long time. But it does exist, and the focus now is on how you get much more Aboriginal affordable housing into the area, so there's a viable community going through. We managed to save the large erecting shop. Originally in the planning controls, it was going to be a 12-storey building because it was too bad, it was going to fall down. And we worked with 3801 and Friends of Eveleigh and various other people to get reports done that actually showed that in fact it was in good condition, it didn't have any issues. And one of the last things that was done by the RWA was actually to remove that 12-storey building listing and to make it existing height. Transport Rail Heritage subsequently removed the active uses from that, and it's now with Mirvac and Transport for New South Wales as an add-on to the South Eveleigh park, but the building itself was preserved. We're also very actively involved in making sure that there was an active blacksmith. They'd been doing stuff on that site for quite some time. When the ATP had set up, there was even an acoustic wall put in. And then in 2008, the RWA decided that they needed to get commercial rent from for everyone, and so they basically said to the blacksmiths, if you can't pay commercial rent, then we're giving you notice to quit, which they did. And then there was a quite significant battle, and the RWA eventually backed down. One of the interesting things in that is that when the DA was done for the redevelopment of the locomotive workshop, it actually states that the blacksmiths are allowed to operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and all other tenants need to be aware of that provision. So that's been preserved in the long term. It doesn't stop people in the brew house opposite from complaining and wanting to know whether they can stop while they're having their dinner. And coming out of that was also a heritage task force that helped to strengthen the heritage voice on the site, and was also important when we moved on to do further work. And then the other one was that in a number of these things I mentioned at the end, we worked with the City of Sydney because these were state-controlled sites. And so the City of Sydney had an interest also in terms of what came out of that. So when the EOI for the sale came out, we basically asked the city to undertake an assessment of the implications for the sale, and that identified a number of areas, and then we worked with urban growth to make sure that there were easements and positive covenants in place to protect things like people being able to walk through the site, and make sure that the heritage collections were going to be held in the same way with the same responsibilities if they're held by the state government, etc. And that then flowed through onto some of the heritage outcomes that we've achieved on South Eveleigh. It has, from what Mirvac said, was one of the most expensive loading docks that they've put into any development, because they wanted to put it through Heritage Bays 1 and 2, and we certainly extracted a high price for them doing that. But while a lot was achieved, we're also got a number of ongoing problems there, where things that were promised or in the development approvals haven't been followed through. Now it's become operational as opposed to a development. So there is more work for REDWatch to do in that space. In North Eveleigh, we finally saved the paint shop. Originally in the BEP1 and in the North Eveleigh concept plan, there was going to be a building built through the middle of it. When Transport for New South Wales came back a couple of years ago, we got a lot of support from the community for having that removed, and that's now been removed in the planning controls for that. We're still not sure where things are up to as far as some other things, like, for example, what's going to happen with the public space. And we still haven't seen, as far as I'm aware, a voluntary planning agreement between Transport for New South Wales and the City of Sydney that was supposed to lock in things like the affordable housing. On Redfern Station, we did a GIPA request that basically got a lot of information out to the community. That's one bit of BEP1 that hasn't happened, a 14-storey above platforms 11 and 12, but it's still on and still active as far as Transport for New South Wales, and they're talking about that being the access into the underground stations for lift access. There was the Lift Redfern campaign with 11,500 signatures to try and get a lift, or to get lifts at Redfern. We wanted them all lifted. It resulted in one lift, which was better than none, but it meant that anybody that needed to come here basically had to change either at Central or somewhere. But it was a campaign that galvanised the local community and had disability groups and everybody very much involved in that. We also pushed, and this was again another RWA idea of having a connection between North and South Eveleigh. So when the Southern Concourse discussion opened up, we pushed to try and get a public concourse connecting those that also linked back to the new railway access Southern Concourse. The problem was that the Southern Concourse was being put together by the rail access people, and so they had no interest in sort of anything else other than accessing the platforms. But it did lead to what basically became the only community access across a paid gated concourse in New South Wales. They had to have the signs made up specially, but it's made a big difference to people being able to get across that part of the site. One of the problems with it is that it Transport now say, well, you don't need to have the connection that's always been talked about between Carriage Works and South Eveleigh, because we've put this in. And this takes sort of about 5 minutes off if you're walking, depending on which way you're going, about a half-hour walk if you're trying to cross the rail corridor. So that's still a campaign as far as REDWatch. I haven't mentioned it here, but that's still REDWatch, ARAG and Friends of Erskineville are still very much working on that connection that was promised way back there in Carr's original things. One of the other things that was important over time was that we worked with NGOs through Groundswell. And Groundswell was set up when LAC were doing master planning, and there was a lot of playing off of different NGOs against one another. If you support us, then you'll do all right out of this. And we formed Groundswell basically as an umbrella so that NGOs could work and support tenants and not have to be worried about individual agencies having to explain, while you're getting money for targeted early intervention, why you're actually doing stuff with this group of people. And that still operates, and REDWatch was involved in that from the beginning. Still doing work with Sydney Local Health District, and the Healthy Link worker came out of that work, as did some health forums and a health impact assessment, which got held up in government because LAC wasn't happy with it. And so it never saw the light of day, and we're about to start a community-led health impact assessment. But we meet regularly as part of Groundswell with Sydney Local Health District around their addendum and what they're doing to work and support public housing tenants. Then we have a similar arrangement with the Department of Communities and Justice, which came from Department of Communities and Justice committing to a human services plan for Waterloo, and then just following on from that, trying to get that happen. We ended up in ongoing conversations with the Department of Communities and Justice, now Homes New South Wales, and we again have an addendum to the human services plan. And then more recently, a lot of work has gone into the Waterloo Human Services Collaborative, which has a mixture of government, non-government and tenants involved. And we're looking at with an action plan, and we're trying to progress a whole pile of those issues that we would have liked to have progressed back with the RWA and their human services plans. But we're now doing that in a much more collaborative number. And we're continuing to work with council. As I said, council's been important because so many of these sites haven't been council run. They've actually been controlled by the government. And so council's been in a position to be able to help us advocate and to do studies and provide support. That's been very important in that. And then finally, volunteers make REDWatch. And there's some faces that many of you will recognise from a particular REDWatch cohort group. But it's all that time that people have put in, and there have been hundreds of them over the years. And if you think about the Lift Redfern petitions, thousands that have actually made a difference in the community. And one of the challenges for REDWatch is basically to get people to have an interest over a larger area than just something in their particular backyard. So hopefully that's an interesting sort of walk down memory lane for those people that were involved in various parts of it. And I'm happy to open it up. I know Sylvie's got to rush off and do something a little bit, so I might throw to you for any comments that you might have reflecting on any of that.
Thanks, Jeff. I always teach on Thursday, so I always leave the REDWatch cohort meetings early. Sorry, still happening. That was really good. I love a copy. I think I want to apologise. I want to apologise that Ben can't be here tonight. He was really hoping that he had something happen in his family today and it's a bit broke. So yeah, because I was also looking forward to. I always blame Ben for the pun that is the name of REDWatch, but I feel like Jeff's PowerPoint perhaps suggests the decision was made elsewhere. So I've been blaming Ben 20 years for that name, which I think is not a great one, but you know, anyway, I think it's been really, I'm really thankful to REDWatch, and I know Jenny's on here tonight as well, but she also, we were young activists moving into the area when we got involved, and getting involved because there was so much activity, particularly around anti-racism reconciliation at the time, and because there was such a clear campaign from the media and the government to say that this is a broken, like all these suburbs are broken. And it was not our experience. Like we found such strength and warmth and power and organising in the community, and yet everything you read was this completely different story about what was happening in these areas that we felt really lucky to be part of. And so that, and what else was really nice and unusual about REDWatch, like we got to connect as young activists with people who'd been around who had even sort of deeper roots, like we got from Glebe not that far away, but Glebe's not Redfern, you know, and be able to do it. It's very rare to have a space that has Labor people, Greens people, Liberal people, independent people working together on a common basis that people are trying to feed up on this community that we love, these communities that we love, and we want to get together and do something about it. I love that REDWatch has been the thorn in the side of the government, and there's one thing for so long, like it's a big deal, right, for a volunteer resident group, but it's also very sad that it's still the same fights that we're having, that it's about public land and public money and who gets to control it and who gets to build on it, rather than what does the community need out of it, what are the strengths of the community, trying to flip that conversation the whole time. You know, I was hoping we could find we have a box of like REDWatch stuff under the bed that Jeff maybe pull out before we came. I was hoping I'd get some like give a few photos of the first meetings. I didn't have that. I do have the first newsletter though from the RWA update, which has an open letter from Frank Sartor in the front, which is to Mickey Mundine. This is the way he kicked it off. It's really wild. I want to keep this. So Jeff, I'm going to leave this here, man. But I want people to like I mean, racism was such a huge part of what the story was about in Redfern and surrounds, and the block is, you know, very clearly the heart of that fight. Yeah. So anyway, I'm going to leave this here. It's wild. I don't know how any public servant could have let the minister out the newsletter to send out something like this. The whole thing is peppered with just like Frank's taken it out of his back where he just written it himself after a few lines. Anyway, I'm going to leave it here. But yeah, that was really great, and actually it's bloody useful. REDWatch has also been the brains trust of all the things that have happened when community wins something, then it gets dragged back. So it's really useful for those of us who are still, you know, and in other roles to keep drawing back to that. So thank you, Jeff, and I want to pass on apologies for Jenny and Ben. Jenny's in Parliament. Ben would have loved to be here. If you're kicking on another week.
One of Frank's famous statement was to tell Mick Mundine to get his black ass in and see me. Just to underline that. A funny story is a number of years later, Mick was going in to see Frank and he tripped on the steps going into the government offices and actually split his trousers. Went up to the meeting with Frank and said to Frank, I should sue you, you know. And I go, why? He said, oh, well, I came up here and I split my trousers. Look, Frank, don't go there, don't go there. Tony, you got any reminiscences?
Echo what Sylvie said, you know, this has been a tremendous organisation for the local area, and I want to acknowledge yourself, Jeff, and Lynn, you know, amongst a whole tribe of others, not just the people here, but people we miss like Trevor and Ross and, you know, those kind of people that were involved from, you know, very early on and very active and, you know, Frank's Huddle drives me nuts, and it always did. But the really nice thing was that, you know, REDWatch was always able to put a reasonable position without just wanting to call the bloke a turd. I mean, that was kind of the sense of it and less useful than REDWatch was over those. And, you know, significant achievements, paint shop, large erecting shop, you know, all of those things. But I think it was also REDWatch. You know, I had serious worries about what they were going to do with the Redfern public school site. And I think REDWatch lobbying for that to remain in, you know, public hands. You know, I'm conscious who it's, you know, organised by, but it's still a public space. And that oval, you know, I was convinced were, you know, not just 18 stories above level 11 and 12 at the station, but I thought that was going to have 35 stories on it. You know, had there not been a lot of the fabulous pressure that that REDWatch put on governments of all persuasions, but particularly that hopeless RWA organisation, stuff like that. So, you know, all credit to you and many others.
Ian, you came in.
Was in the early times, just before him. And so, REDWatch was actually a magic formulation. It was, from my perspective, it was a great way of getting to understand other sides of that argument, issues involved. And as it really represented this community, because we had Elizabeth down the road, which was a visit Farrell, and others were floating around. Then we got that and geographical stuff. We got the Clovis office a few times, into Parliament House a few times to talk about things. We're just setting it all up. Yeah, no, it's amazing to be able to be back here and have a look. I've been away for a long time and seen some of the turns and common places that we've got. So it's great to see it still doing it, Jeff.
David.
I guess I'm a sort of a.
Here 2 hours.
Have been still am somewhat a neutral observer in the whole process, and thank you for that great presentation. It was excellent. There's actually a PhD in that.
Yeah.
For the purpose of demonstrating the clumsiness and stupidity of the whole bureaucratic and political processes that go on as people change and come up with new ideas all the outside influences. And it's a classic example of you sometimes wonder how does government ever work when you see that sort of thing. I guess at all levels. And one of the impressive things for me as a neutral observer is the way you've kept REDWatch fairly multi-partisan with the different stakeholders not too much pushing their own little barrow. It's good. The other positive thing about doing a story like this. It just proves how a few committed people and a relatively small organisation can have a lot of impact and can achieve a lot just by. So congratulations, well done.
Should read that thing from Jenny.
I've been talking a lot, so there's a message from Jenny Leong.
Came in fairly late this afternoon. So, dear REDWatch members, congratulations. I'm very sorry that New South Wales Parliament sitting means that I cannot be with you all tonight to celebrate 20 remarkable years of REDWatch. It is such a tremendous achievement for any community group to reach this incredible milestone, let alone one that has achieved as much and been so vital to the local community as REDWatch. 2 decades ago, it was my absolute pleasure to be part of the very first meeting of REDWatch with so many of you who are no doubt still in the room today. I acknowledge particularly my Greens colleague on the City of Sydney Council, Sylvie Ellsmore, who is there tonight, who was there tonight, and who was also present on that evening in 2004. Over the years, it has been so energising to work alongside REDWatch on tireless community campaigns for new active transport links, more public housing, better planning, and much needed infrastructure improvements. REDWatch has played such an important role in keeping the Redfern, Eveleigh, Darlington and Waterloo communities engaged with and informed of the decisions and processes that will impact them, and being an absolute inspiration to community groups far beyond our local area. I also acknowledge the tireless contributions of all members and volunteers, those still with us and those who have passed on. Congratulations to you all for 20 years of this incredible community organisation, and I look forward to working with you for at least part of the next 20. Which is
Bloody.
Can I just make one thing? So
Yep.
I know it's late night, but
That's right.
we've got it in here. I want you to read, I have this distinct memory about the whole Redfern-Waterloo redevelopment. There was, you mentioned Frank wanted to put a, that's not Frank, that's George wanted to put a car park under the ground. What I recall was he had this idea of what he described as a Parisian boulevard at that end of Chalmers Street. And that was in opposition to Clover's initial view that it should be like an English over with a kind of a white picket fence around. And this is my memory of it.
Yep.
And all I can say is I think what we ended up with worked really well. And that was kind of, you know, a much better and heavily invested in continuation of what it was before, which was Park Footy Oval and much more accessible than it was when it was all locked up. Happy to agree with that. And a really nice park. And I think that was a huge achievement.
It was going to be a 30-metre high building, built structural grandstands. The George's proposal with the car park parking underneath that. And the problem was there was no air and breathing space. So people leaving after the game would probably have had about one game there and that. So many deaths. But it was going to be a massive, classic sort of stadium structure on that space. And that was the intent because they couldn't get into the football stadium. But they locked out of there and that I still cannot believe they haven't got back to it. That's another matter. the Redfern Oval, I mean, what came out of it in the end is I think it's a wonderful space for the community. And just the stand there and everything, it's been used at different bases at different stages. And You know, it's on the right scale. It's right scale, but it has the capacity there on the far side of things to have temporary stand structures put in if they're with purposes.
Anybody online? Have anything they want to add? Mike?
Yeah, I'll add a couple of points. So I want to apologise that I'm not there. Living in Katoomba these days doesn't make it easy to get to a REDWatch meeting, and I've spent the last 2 days in Newcastle training people that are homeless with lived experience of homelessness on how to be advocates, and REDWatch featured quite heavily in that presentation. Having been the convener of REDWatch for about 11 years of your 20, it's certainly been a learning curve. I believe that if you can convene a REDWatch Quad meeting, you can convene any meeting. You definitely learn the skills of wrestling with some tough cookies across the political spectrum. One of the things I think REDWatch does well is train community leaders and train community volunteers. And if you think about in the local government level, state government, even the federal government, or even sitting watching the TV and watching the drum, the volume of people that have come up through the coordination group to then become quite influential leaders, whether politically or otherwise, is quite phenomenal, the volume of people that have done that. And I think that's a testimony to the work that REDWatch does. I think being driven by volunteers and driven with no funding is an amazing achievement. Obviously want to mention my own organisation, Counterpoint, who's been proud to support REDWatch, covering and helping out with costs where they can, and providing staff, and will continue to do that for the next 20 years. And Counterpoint gets as much out of REDWatch as we put into it. All those things that Jeff mentioned in terms of the human services planning, the housing campaigns, the Lift Redfern campaign, Groundswell, couldn't have done it without the support and resources of REDWatch. So thank you for that. One of the things I was teaching the advocates is I want the bureaucrats to get an instant migraine every time they hear your name. And that's certainly something that happens locally when REDWatch's name comes up in any meetings that I'm in with bureaucrats. And I think that's a good space to be, where people are actually not just frightened and cautioned around REDWatch, but actually respect REDWatch. They're often the very first people to get a phone call about what's happening in the hood, what's their views on the hood, what's the temperature of the community, and I think that's a testimony to your work. I think in terms of the future, we just need to get better at recruiting new members and new leaders. Jeff's not going to be about forever, and we really need to get that knowledge and skills that Jeff's got into new leaders and try and retain those leaders. And I think a lot of people don't realise the volume of work that goes on behind the scenes and in between REDWatch meetings. It's not, REDWatch is certainly not just a talk fest. It does a lot of work in between meetings. So if you can support, or if you know somebody that can support, I'm sure Jeff would love to hear from you. Want to thank everybody that I've met through REDWatch over the years and who've guided me and gave me their time and given me the opportunities and supported the work that Counterpoint does as well. So thank you, congratulations, and I look forward to our next round of fights, whatever the subject might be.
Thanks, Mike. Elizabeth, do you want to say anything from Europe?
Where I am, where it's morning. Yes, thanks, Jeff, and hello, Jeff and Lynn. And I also recognise Jose and Ian from those early times, and Tony Pooley. And Tony was at that first meeting that I was at too. And my recollection is that our discussion about what might happen was all within the parameters of the current planning system. And, we were looking at all the options within that the government might choose to impose. And then bang, suddenly there was a statutory authority brought in over the whole thing. So that was certainly a shock. I'm also glad you mentioned the Mick Mundine and Frank Sartor incident. I remember that well. And in fact, Jeff, I think it was up the steps of Parliament House, which adds more to the symbolism. And I think Frank's eventual response was something like, just let's not go there. Picking up on Mike's point about REDWatch's work, your campaigning has been absolutely phenomenal. But what also has always impressed me is the level of information you've provided to the community. And it's a job the government should have been doing. And every email I get, and we still get the emails, we're just so impressed at the level of information that REDWatch is providing to the community. That's it.
Can I say something?
Yep.
This become. I share what, like, I'm learning from Aboriginal housing, but I'm more so a community person. I live in Redfern also, yeah, I've been in this building and many times, but for us in the development down there on the block, Eveleigh development, having REDWatch, we were just in a bubble of miscommunication, misinformation, and all the different things that were being confronted with to try and get this development. And I found that REDWatch was like the only voice of reason in this, because you always sort of put out the information. It wasn't about us, it was just the information that people wanted to hear. You came and talked to us and talk to everyone. And at the time we weren't able to do that. Looking back, we weren't able to communicate that to Redfern and to everyone else out there. But at the end of the day, we've been able to deliver the houses that we promised that we were going to do. And just about most of the things that we've said we're going to do, we've nearly finished the childcare fit out in maybe 3 months. But that whole development on the block, it's all at capacity. It's all fully tenanted, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tenants, social and affordable housing. But, thank you. Thank you to everyone here that's REDWatch with the support through the, I feel like we're in the trenches all the time. We're just like, sorry to say, it felt like we're just swimming in sewer half of the time, trying to just keep above water. And whether it was Frank turning up and announcing he's here, or the open letter to Mickey in the newsletter, and,
Well, that's right.
yeah, that newsletter, and we turned up at their office, and it just happens that was probably going off topic, but we turned up at his office for a planning meeting, John Manton, and Mickey slipped and he ripped the side of his pants, but we were called into the meeting. Anyhow, we had the meeting, Frank was there, and then Mickey said, look, I'm going to sue you. Look, you can see my black. And it was his backside, he was wearing yellow tops. It was just like, it happened, so, and that was, that letter and the slip up and all that, but thank you, everyone. It's all, and congratulations, 20 years.
Thanks, Lami. Anybody else, either online or in the room, or we break and?
Back in the stage, just repeating what the Lord Mayor said this morning that her social housing before. She just really wanted to pass on her congratulations as well. Just thank you for everything you've done for the community and REDWatch has done. That is so much support. She really values that. So everybody.
yeah, no, it was appreciated, Clover's comments this morning to the tenants. Adam, you've been around for a bit. Do you want anything to say? Now you're a bureaucrat.
Yeah, I'm one of the bureaucrats now, Jeff. Look, I won't really say much. I think Mike, yourself, Elizabeth, and those are comments so far, but I've kind of captured everything. But you know, voice of reason. You know, I think that is a really good point. REDWatch is the voice of reason, and I think Mike, you mentioned how REDWatch has a lot of trust in community and a lot of trust actually with the bureaucrats like myself, right? You know, we really rely on REDWatch for the information. You know, to support our own work, because as a bureaucrat, you're not really on the ground every day hearing and listening and lingering and loitering and understanding the issues and understanding what really matters to people. So we, you know, I think do rely on groups like REDWatch to understand what's happening in community and to use that information to advocate and to change policy and to do what we do day to day. I think the comment earlier of just the volume of information that REDWatch get out, it is such Jeff, I think you're renowned of being the information man, or I call you the encyclopedia of Waterloo and Redfern. And I absolutely think you are. Yeah, and I just you know, in summary, I think REDWatch is a fantastic example of community coming together, holding power to account. So really putting government on notice to say, no, you know, we are empowered as a community to determine what is best for this community. I think that's a really special and powerful thing. So yeah, congrats to REDWatch, and it was an awesome experience being on a coordination committee for a number of years. Michael Schweenan got me into the coordination committee when I started at Counterpoint back in 2018, when I was young and shy and had no idea what I was doing. And it was an incredibly rewarding experience, and obviously really appreciate the guidance of the likes of, you know, yourself, Mike, and Jeff and others for throughout all these years. So yeah, congrats to REDWatch.
Thanks, Adam. And I think
I'll
it's
say something.
Sorry.
I'll say something when you're ready. Yeah.
I
just want to thank you for being there, and thank you for the support that you give. I don't know what really Waterloo would have done without you. Okay. So thanks. Yeah.
That's great. I mean, I guess putting this together, it sort of, you don't realise what things we have achieved until you actually sit back and reflect back on some of that. And it's one of the things that we don't do very well, is celebrate our achievements and what we've actually done. So it's been an interesting exercise for myself. And also just going through the huge volume of material, trying to actually put that into a story was a real sort of task. Anybody else before we sort of want to say anything? Jose, you've been around for a while. Anything? Or Norrie, you were involved in doing stuff back in 2004 as well.
I don't have anything more to add. So.
Okay, well, let's
the history of the riots. I lived on the block in 2005. And the only riot was caused by the police riot squad.
Okay, well, let's call it a night, and we'll break and have some sort of drinks and nibbles. Thank you very much for coming along and for your reminiscence, and let's party.